Good afternoon and welcome to our town hall with Senator Kevin Cramer. My name is Luke Hellier with the Coalition for Secure Energy Future, and I'm joined by Jonathan Fortner, the Vice President for Government Affairs and External Relations with the Lignite Energy Council, as well as Jason Bohr, the President and CEO of the Lignite Council. Just a couple of housekeeping items today. We've got a function of chat. If you have a question, it's in your panel to the right of your screen. Or if you're having an issue with the chat, feel free to email me directly at info@secureenergyfuture.org, and I'll add the questions to the queue. Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Luke, for arranging this for technology's sake. Thanks, Senator, for joining us. Kind of a crazy time for energy in general with the oil prices. Demand is completely unexpected right now due to changes in home consumption, business, manufacturing, all those types of things. That's uncertain. But as I think of that, then as I introduce you to the group, I just think there's probably not a lot of people who are as suited for this particular time as you are. You look back at your portfolio when you were a public service commissioner here, you're dealing with energy, you're dealing with broadband, you're dealing with some of these interesting issues. And then, you know, that background from permitting pipelines, international borders, all of this stuff puts you in a position to be extremely knowledgeable for our industry and for North Dakota. So I don't think we could have a better person in Washington, D.C. for us right now. Just as a way of introduction to those on the call, Senator Cramer previously served as our congressman from North Dakota, familiar with the entire state from that perspective, as well as serving for multiple terms in as a public service commissioner, and really just becoming an overall knowledgeable expert on the types of issues that we're going to be talking about today. Made the move to the Senate. We're grateful to have you there, doing a great job for us. And again, with a administration right now who is generally favorable to the types of things we're interested in, it's great to have a voice there to help guide that policy to where it's good for North Dakota and the rest of the country. So Senator Cramer, will begin just by turning a little bit of time over to you. Luke's discussed a mechanism that we can later take questions from the audience, from the calls, but let's give you a chance to just kick things off with some opening remarks.
Sure. No, thanks, Jason. Thanks, Luke, for facilitating this. And every day I get to try out a new teleconferencing or video conferencing platform. So the Senate doesn't let us do any of these things. So I always have to be invited to somebody else's event, which has worked really well. So this looks great from my perspective. So thanks for doing it. It is a weird time, you guys. You know that better than anybody. In fact, I don't mind admitting to you all, because I know you would just keep it among us friends. But I keep thinking that of all the things that could go wrong, why couldn't like all coal-fired power plants shut down because of the pandemic and let everybody see what would happen if it really did happen? And of course, we'd never let that. In fact, I've been so impressed that our lignite companies they've been preparing for the pandemic and the eventuality that people wouldn't be able to come to work so well that they've oversupplied coal so that we never have to worry about an outage. And I think when I think of that magnanimous gesture, which of course doesn't even seem magnanimous to our culture and to the miners' culture and the North Dakota culture, I hope people appreciate how hard you all and your organization's members are working to make sure that the lights stay on. And I wish that appreciation could be demonstrated in better policy in many areas. Jason, with regard to my work, both first as a commissioner, where I had the great honor of not only doing rate regulation and overseeing, probably one of the more interesting parts of it was overseeing resource management and the type of integrated resource planning and whatnot that our utilities did, and while at the same time setting their rates, was of course having the portfolio for mining and for reclamation and AML. It was really some of the richest education a person could have for going to Congress. And so now I find myself in the Environment and Public Works Committee overseeing things like Interior and the EPA and A lot of what I learned is come in very handy, but more importantly, what I learned from you all by having the type of access I get to have to our stakeholders is what's really invaluable. And I think, and I hope, and I think we all appreciate as North Dakotans how precious our relationship is. And when I say our, I don't mean just mine. I mean John's and Kelly's and Doug's and our, you know, obviously the state legislatures. The relationship we have with our stakeholders is very uncommon in Washington, because we have the advantage, because our founders were smart enough to create a United States Senate that would be a roadblock to New York and California taking over, even long before they envisioned a California. So it's really been a great honor, but it's also been a huge challenge. The other thing I would just throw out there for the time like this, Jason, is that among my 5 committees is the banking committee. And you know, I was told by Mitch McConnell, no freshman is going to get on the banking committee. Everybody wants to be on the banking committee. It's a great fundraising committee, all that stuff. And I'm thinking, I don't really want to be on the banking committee either. You know, and next thing I know, I'm on the banking committee. And as I like to say, that's like when Newt Gingrich put Sonny Bono on the Judiciary Committee. But it's become really handy lately with dealing with the CARES Act, the various credit tools, and obviously the Paycheck Protection Program is the most famous and the most common. And by the way, North Dakota has been nailing it better than pretty much any other state per capita. And but now these new credit facilities, I've just been listening to Jay Powell a little bit, the Federal Reserve Chairman. He and I had a long telephone conversation the day before yesterday, and in listening to his comments here on Fed's action, or better yet, non-action, which I think is what the current situation calls for, but making sure that the credit facilities of the CARES Act, especially those facilities that the Treasury took the $454 billion that we appropriated and is leveraging another roughly $4 trillion through the Federal Reserve tools to make sure that there's no bias against fossil fuel and utilities that utilize fossil fuel, because that bias, as you know, you guys, is prevalent in the banking community among the big banks. We were especially concerned, a group of us, when it was announced that the Federal Reserve would be utilizing BlackRock as the main driver, the main facilitator of the widely utilized credit facilities and whatever new credit facilities they came up with as the facility. And BlackRock has probably the worst reputation in terms of its bias against fossil fuels. I brought this all the way to the president. The president was actually a little bit surprised to find out that some of his friends in the big banking communities, especially BlackRock, were anti-fossil fuels. The discussion wrapped up with the president by him saying, well, frankly, it doesn't really matter how they feel about fossil fuels. I like them. So, but I literally had this discussion with Jay Powell just the day before yesterday. He reassured me in very strong and comforting terms that BlackRock is very good at facilitating these kinds of things, but that their personal or their professional or corporate lending policy and credit policy would not have any bearing on the CARES Act. And so, but this is a fight that we've been having, as you know, and along with some other biases, of course, among utilities, within public policy. I could go through a long list of things. I think, Jason, I just soon wait for some question and answer opportunity to talk about some of the things we're doing either on the environmental front or on the utility front. Happy to talk about some of the specific things in North Dakota if there's a desire to do that and it's appropriate. I might just say this as sort of a launching off point. If I was to go through the last, I don't know, 15 months or so, or maybe even the last three and a half years, but especially the last 15 months, through the various actions and stuff that we've taken, the most recent one that y'all maybe are aware of, but I want you to keep track of, if not, is I did lead a letter that a number of members signed to Mitch McConnell, giving him a heads up that if in the next COVID-19 relief package, whether it's whatever it looks like, whether it's a safety net, a stimulus, a recovery, whatever it might look like, that any attempts by Nancy Pelosi and liberals to extend any further the renewable credits and whatnot for renewable fuels would be met with fierce resistance. And it's important that Mitch understands that there's a block of us that will block something like that. It gives him added leverage when he's negotiating with the White House and with Secretary Mnuchin and the Speaker, and of course Chuck Schumer as well, because it's not a straight Democratic Republican issue. There are enough Republican members who sort of see all energy the same, or even have a preference for renewables because they might have a lot of that industry in their state, Chuck Grassley, and or they might just have sort of a moderate view of these things, like say Lisa Murkowski, who happens to be chairman of the Energy and Natural Resource Committee. So anyway, I led that letter, and it's gotten a lot of attention in the trades. You may have noticed Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and as well as the energy trades. So we're going to put that on the table. One of the things I'd be looking for some feedback from you all on, with regard to this, is when we get to that eventual point where we're negotiating a phase 4, if you will, and these things come up. As you know, we fought them off in the last round. The price for fighting them off in the last round, by the way, was dropping $3 billion for filling up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the United States. So we paid what I consider a very small price for keeping those extensions out of this phase 3 bill. But in phase 4, it's going to be front and center. I mean, they want the craziest, as you know, energy and environmental policies imaginable, including everything that's associated with the Green New Deal. And the question will become, and what we'll be coming back to you all with, is if we find ourselves in a position to get something, what is it we want, and what is it we're willing to give to get it? And I'll be leaning heavily on you all for that advice. So with that, you guys, I'm happy to just open it up and maybe try to answer some questions. I'm looking at the chat here a little bit, and I see somebody's got one right in front of me. If you don't mind, do you want me to just go to that?
Go ahead, yeah.
Oh, in fact, they're asking a question I maybe have answered. We've seen the financial industry become more hostile to the fossil fuel industry. The next administration might try to clamp down even more, like they have with firearms. Anything that can be done to combat that? Okay, so maybe I'll just elaborate a little bit more on that. In addition to my raising the issue of the CARES Act with the Federal Reserve Chairman, I have raised it with the banks. And in fact, right now we're circulating, it might even be wrapped up, I'm not sure where we are on it, but we're circulating a letter that my team has authored directly to the president, highlighting how the big banks, the hostility of the big banks, and reminding them through him that they are FDIC insured, that they are going to do very well by the CARES Act and other financial tools that the Federal Reserve is putting out, and that these same banks always come to us when they want regulatory relief, while they go to cocktail parties with Elizabeth Warren, and that they're going to have to pick a side one of these times, and they can't simply be the cool kids at the country club and sip their martinis while they tout renewables and then shut down our fossil industry that's so important, and then somehow think they're still going to get everything they want from the Republicans, who are the ones that really have helped them the most. So there's a lot being done on that front. A lot of us are watching it closely. Like I said, my friend Dan Sullivan, senator from Alaska, and I have sort of led the charge on the oil front in this regard, mainly from our positions on the Armed Services Committee. However, because I'm also on the Banking Committee, Dan's been a very good partner on this front as well, just to continue to highlight this issue and remind the banks that they're very federal government dependent, and they should be careful, who they have cocktails with, shall we say. Just
while we look for the next question, I just want to reiterate that, because it's critically important as we look to what happens in the future with funding large projects, whether it's a large retrofit or whatever. You got our members trying to go into the markets and get financing, or financing for pipelines, whether it's CO2 or oil. And we're fighting this battle in the banking industry that it shouldn't be happening, but yet there it is.
Well, Jason, I think part of why that's the case, and this is why I think it's really important that you guys raise the issue with me and with John and Kelly and the governor, and that your colleagues around the country do the same, because it's pretty easy to lose track of certain things that are happening, and things like this can be happening without our notice. Now, clearly it hasn't lately, but we need the constant reminder, because it's just not, it's just not natural for us to obstruct. That's not how we're built. It's part of why we're conservatives, because we don't really like a lot of government intervention. So whether it comes to firearms, which I just did a video yesterday on, by the way, because we've been getting some attention over a similar letter that we did for fossil fuels with firearms. And so, we need to constantly remind these bankers that while they are conservatives and we're conservatives, that we also are activists, and we need to pay attention to preserving those things that are important.
So just a reminder, you can email info@secureenergyfuture.org or use the chat function for questions. I've got 2 email questions, Senator. The first one is actually, I have two people that have submitted similar questions. The PTC, production tax credit, has created a power marketplace in which the value of electricity is now artificially lower than the cost of producing it for a set selective generators. This reduced power market value has been further driven down by unusually low costs of natural gas as well. This devalued market created by federal actions is undercutting the value of lignite-powered dependable electrical generation to the point of threatening our continued existence. What can and should the federal government do to address this situation and give lignite power the value it deserves in a true all of the above energy marketplace?
So as I sometimes say at these things, you can go ahead and get yourself some popcorn now and sit down, and then I'll just entertain you with great frustration. So that's exactly right. And whatever the early reasoning was for whether it's production tax credit or other credits that heavily favored, whether it's wind, solar, renewables in general, it's long past leveling the playing field, clearly. And the notion that somehow the diversity that it brought to the table, it's fulfilled that, but it's no longer diversity that they're after. It's the ultimate moving goalpost. Went from maybe having 10% renewables in your mix made sense. Utilities would tell you that. Although I've never, frankly, personally, even when I was a regulator, and I think many of you know this, I was the wind energy's one of the wind energy's favorite citers of wind farms, because frankly, well, I better not say it because it's probably recorded, but the idea that a farmer or landowner couldn't do with his land whatever he wanted to do, and the fact that you could literally get extorted by liberal environmental groups to somehow justify, or if you could pay them off to allow the killing or the taking of birds or something, or habitat, just absurd to me. It's just absurd to me. So I was always a good energy citer, if you will, and permitter, but I never vote. I wouldn't vote to allow wind in rate base. Most of our wind, of course, as you know, goes to another state where they're crazy enough to pay extra. So I'm like, okay, well, if you want to do that, fine. But I never liked it in rate base. So now, okay. So people would say, well, diversity is good. Another 10% in the mix is fine. It makes sense, and maybe that's the maximum. I always thought, well, it's not the maximum potential. It's probably the least harm, but was never the maximum potential, because if you have a low cost, always there, completely reliable, completely available, long-term solution, whether it's coal or nuclear, why would you want something else? So it never made sense. I always just thought that was language of love stuff that sounded good, but really didn't make much economic sense. So as we go forward now, I think everybody's everybody's been should have been more than satisfied. And let's truly level the playing field. And the first thing you do is you let those credits expire. And if you can hasten their expiration, all the better. But we're not in a political climate that's going to quite allow that. Although I do think that local regulators could. I think state regulators could, and I think you've seen some of that happen in North Dakota. But I think even from an economic standpoint, if you do an honest economic analysis of the cost of dual fuels and the loss of, if you're abandoning, sunk assets that while they might be old, they're still providing low cost energy, then and in exchange for something different, something new, something shiny, or if you have to get to something new and something shiny to make them both work, you have to do a full, honest analysis economically, in my view. And I think there's a lot of times that doesn't happen. I think the other part of it is on the environmental side. You guys, we've gotten pretty engaged, and I'll try to avoid too much specificity, but maybe not. We've gotten pretty engaged in some more localized issues as it relates to utilities, whether it's cooperatives or investor-owned utilities that are large customers of lignite, burn the fuel for low-cost, reliable electricity, who are looking at things like regional haze, for example. The next chapters, the next phases, looking at long-term investments into existing plants and wondering what to do. Well, we're very active, and I've been especially active on the Environment and Public Works Committee with the EPA on making sure there's flexibility for states in their SIP. Remember that in many of these cases, the units themselves are not what are regulated in terms of the federal government, it's the state. And one thing that this administration has done probably as well, if not better, than any Republican administration in my lifetime, or certainly any Democratic administration, and that is recognizing the role of cooperative federalism and the type of state expertise that we have and other states have, and really need to exercise that in a big way. And regional haze is one of those areas where I think of providing states flexibility in their state implementation plans to carry out these regulations makes a lot of sense. So now that means we have to be really engaged with their state, and I know you guys are. But the reason we've gotten so involved is because we want to make sure that the federal agencies that I have jurisdiction over on my committee are doing it right. We'll leave it up to you guys to make sure that the state's doing it right. Jessica can handle that all by herself. So, but we'll take care of the federal side as long as we're in constant communication. So those are just a couple of the things that we can be doing. I do think too, the one other piece, and I know you're all familiar with this, is I've become FERC's worst nightmare, and I like them. That's the weird thing, is most of them are our people. But making sure that even Republican appointed, even Donald Trump appointed FERC commissioners have a clear understanding of the value of baseload, and not just a clear understanding, but are willing to make the important calls to properly value baseload electricity in the mix. And that's not been an easy fight, as you know, and I won't go into any more details. You're probably all quite familiar with them, but I think we're in a pretty good place there. I think one of the problems we have in North Dakota is that the MISO market is not as easy for us to maneuver probably as some of the other markets, just given the abundance of resources. But nonetheless, I think if we're going to always plan for a certain scenario, a certain rosy scenario, I think we also have to plan for a worst case scenario. And a worst case scenario is the only fuel source available to keep the lights on is lignite coal in our part of the country, and that needs to be valued in rate structures both at the federal and the state level.
Senator, we've got about 150 people on the call. I bet a lot of them aren't familiar with some of the work that you've done with FERC. So if you want to go into the weeds a little bit more, I mean, it's critical that we engage FERC more now than ever before. So your work is extremely appreciated.
Well, it is sort of fun. I can tell you, it's frustrating, but it's also sort of interesting to at least have the resources that I have, the background that I have, and then at least have enough knowledge to be dangerous and know their vocabulary a little bit. So last year, you know, the FERC is a 5-member body. It's always 3-2 majority membership. The majority is made up of the president's party. The president nominates all of them, then they're confirmed, and they have staggered terms, and you maybe know all of that. But we almost never have 5 commissioners, and it's been hard under President Trump. So, but we've always had 3 commissioners, which you have to have a quorum. And then if you have a 2-to-1 majority, you can do, you know, your philosophy can rule. Now, remembering that FERC is like our Public Service Commission. They are independent of politics. Now, our Public Service Commission is elected, but most utility commissions, of course, are appointed, and FERC is appointed. And yes, they are an independent body. They are independent of the politics of the presidency, just like the Federal Communications Commission is, just like the Federal Trades Commission is, and other bodies. But they're not independent of their personal philosophies. If they were, then what would be the point of, first of all, an elected president nominating them, and secondly, of an elected Senate confirming them? So I'm one that never apologizes for my politics or my philosophy. Everybody that voted for me and against me knows my philosophy, and it's why they either voted for me or against me. So we've been given this authority just like the president has. So I set that as sort of the backdrop for my action with FERC. We have a 2-to-1 majority, we being conservatives right now on the commission. The commission's done some pretty good work. They've done some good work in certain areas like a floor, for example, setting a rate floor in certain markets. They've not done that in MISO. Again, it depends a little bit on the mix and whatnot. But remembering too that rates are basically determined on, you know, just and reasonable. That's the legal standard, just and reasonable rates. But the additional responsibility to a regulator is reliability, and particularly as it relates to our grid and the resiliency of that grid. And part of that grid's resiliency we know is cybersecurity, but another important part of it is making sure that there's enough baseload electricity to keep the grid going. And there are only 2 fuels that really work. There are 3, but only 2 that work today, and that, of course, is coal and nuclear. Gas can, but the same people that hate coal hate pipelines. So that's become a little bit of a problem. Okay, so again, that's just, I know you know all this, but as sort of background, when President Trump, when the rumors last year were floating around about the 3rd Republican nominee to FERC, he happens to be or was at least the chief counsel for the FERC. And the reason that's important is you know he understands this stuff, you know he knows it well. But you might also recall that one of the first things that President Trump tasked Rick Perry, the Secretary of Energy at the time, with was coming up with a plan to save coal and to find a way to make sure that the large investment in not just jobs, but more importantly, the reliability of coal-fired electricity, that was going to require some great thought and some sort of a strategy and plan. And so he came up with this basically rewarding long-term storage. And of course, we had to, you might remember this, you guys, but when Rick Perry came out with his plan for providing an appropriate floor, appropriate benefit or value, price value for storage, on-site storage of enough fuel to go for several days, they weren't considering Minemouth as storage. And I'm like, if you want 40 days, how about 800 years? Does that count? Because that's what we have. So we had to work with them a little bit to get the right language in that. And but anyway, all that said, FERC kicked it out rather quickly, rather abruptly. And it probably didn't pass an easy legal test. I don't doubt that it maybe was a bridge too far, but it was quick and it would have been effective. But what bothered me was that FERC then said, we'll try to come up with something. I'm oversimplifying, and they went about the business of sort of coming up with something, but the something that they came up with really wouldn't get there. And they weren't working real quickly. And so because of that, I had great concerns about Commissioner Danley, who at the time was the chief counsel. So when he was nominated, I put a hold on him. And in fact, even before he was nominated, just to share all this, and this has now been widely reported, but even before that, I went to the White House and I worked with, I tried to work with the economic team at the White House to let them know that I had concerns about this guy. And they assured me he was great and don't worry about him. He's, you know, he understands the siting of pipelines and things like that. And I said, well, I'm not concerned. Not that I'm unconcerned, but that's not my main concern, the siting of pipelines. I'm grateful that he's good at siting pipelines, understands the value of siting pipelines. My concern is on valuing base load electricity for the sake of the resiliency of our grid. If for no other reason, and that's reason enough. Yeah. Oh, don't worry, Kevin, he's going to be great. Well, I said, just so you know, I'm not convinced. So I did meet with him after the president nominated him. I met with him. I was dissatisfied with his answers. He was very careful, and I understand that he had to be. One thing about a FERC commissioner, sort of like a judge, a federal judge, they can't bias a future decision. If they do, of course, they have to recuse themselves, and then it wouldn't do much good to have a good commissioner if you couldn't vote on something. But nonetheless, I wasn't adequately convinced that he would do what we need to be done. I held him through the end of the year, which meant he had to be renominated. That's rather drastic for one senator to hold up a nominee of a president from his own party through an entire year and require him to have to come back again. So I don't know that I've ever told this whole story to a group like this, but it, like I said, it did get out after the new year. Somebody in one of the trades had learned of it, and so my problem when a reporter asks me a question is I generally answer it. So anyway, when he got renominated and came back, Senator Hoeven and I met with him together, along with two other members that I'll remain nameless, but were really, really important. And we just made really clear that if we don't get some assurance that you at least have a basic understanding and a commitment to better policy that relates to the resiliency of the grid, you're not going to become a FERC commissioner. And that would have required the president to go back to the starting blocks and start all over. Well, anyway, you might recall, you guys, early in this term being 2020, FERC did do some pretty good work on setting some floors, or some price floors. This was significant. First of all, the greenies went berserk, so you know that they made a good decision. And Mr. Danley was the general counsel through all of that. So he did, in fact, without having to answer a question, did demonstrate that he has a commitment to making sure that the lights stay on and understanding the role of baseload electricity. So he was, in fact, renominated. He was, in fact, confirmed by the Senate and is now on the commission. And I have a strong confidence in his work and his commitment.
Thanks for that explanation. It's a little into the weeds, but again, it's one of the most important parts that we're working on right now is how do you make the electricity markets work better for the value that coal provides. So Luke, have we got any more questions in?
Yeah, a couple more, Jason. The first is, what will the next stimulus look like? I think you touched on this a little bit, the push from renewables. Do you think that there is possibility for a package for coal related, and I think resiliency, as you mentioned, and those type of things?
So really, it's a good question. It's a good time for a discussion, maybe. The basic question is what will a fourth or the next round of stimulus look like? Right now, at least the Republicans and certainly Mitch McConnell want to pump the brakes on stimulus because, I mean, my goodness, we've spent now what, $3 trillion, and that's just appropriated dollars. And in addition to that, I forget what the Federal Reserve portion of it is, but it's a good $4 trillion just from what we've appropriated for leverage of another $4 trillion. The Fed balance sheet went from about $4 to $12 or $13 trillion before the Congress started appropriating money. So there's a lot on the line right now, and much of it, in fact, most of it, other than stuff directly to hospitals and CDC and the pandemic itself, and the dollars in the Paycheck Protection Program, most of the really big, credit facilities are just beginning. In fact, in most cases, the term sheets haven't even been finalized yet, although they will be in the next day or two, I think, based on what I've heard from particularly from Federal Reserve Chairman Powell. So most of that hasn't even kicked in. Plus, the restarting of the economy is just beginning. So hopefully demand comes back, you guys. I was just amused looking at my TV, in fact, what's on right now? Okay, so this TV right now is on Fox Business. I go from Fox Business to CNBC to Bloomberg. Basically, that's what I watch most of the day. And if I have 2 or 3 TVs, they're all on, depending on what office I'm in. So I was watching, and I noticed that there was a tagline that said, this April is the best month in the market since May of 1984, something like that. Boy, what a weird world we're living in when, 24,500 or whatever the Dow is at, looks like the best month in decades, but it is. And so, there's some optimism, and if the rollout and the recovery is looking good, maybe we can avoid much more of a stimulus altogether. That would be our hope. That said, there's a couple of things that there's a desire for. One is we want to make sure that our healthcare facilities aren't damaged by their good intentions, and that's already happened to some degree. That's why we've been very generous with direct dollars, whether it's through Medicare, Medicaid, or just direct to hospitals and healthcare facilities, to make sure that their capacity that they were left available for COVID-19 that was never utilized is rewarded, because the profit centers have not been executed for these hospitals and clinics, even our rural hospitals. So that's going to always be first and foremost and on the front burner. But the other big thing, of course, are the states that want a lot more money, and they want money for everything. And some of them want money for things that have been problems in their states for 10, 20 or more years, including, public pension plans and things like that. And that's an area that we really don't want to start funding. We don't want to start borrowing money or printing money so that we can pay Illinois' public pension plan off as a result of that was bad as a result of bad leadership in the past. So we want to be responsive to states and to local communities and whatnot with regard to their actual costs related to the pandemic, but not try to fix their decades-old ills. But that's where there's going to be a lot of demand. Now, I bring that up because when it comes time to negotiate a potential next plan, we know what the priorities are of the speaker. The speaker wants and Chuck Schumer, they want a lot of money for large city mayors and blue state governors. They want the trial lawyers to run rampant, and they want to be able to if they can, use this pandemic, this crisis, to get Medicare for all or some other socialist healthcare agenda. We don't want any of those things. But if we're going to get in a position where we need to do something, you might see everything on the table. And at that point, maybe there are some things for baseload electricity and for the fuel that generates it. But it won't come at a small price, would be my guess. So that's what I mean by we'll want to be in very regular contact. It would be a rather shallow victory if we were able to get some assistance for coal, but in the process have to extend the production tax credit for wind for 5 or 10 more years, because
right. Yeah, we've talked about that. And one of the things that's on the table is even just direct payments to renewable projects. You go beyond the subsidy.
So 30% of their capital cost isn't enough. I mean,
right.
Really, credit is a direct payment, right?
Yep. And so we've got a letter actually in the works that we're enumerating some of those things. Basically, how can you make a package? How can you put it together that the value to the coal world is equivalent to the value to what the other folks are asking for? I mean, they're asking for just straight up cash.
Yeah,
right.
Well, that's great.
And we've got, if all we're asking for is a 48A, then we need to do a better job of getting you ideas.
Well, no, so great point. Okay, that's a great point, because you're right. Things like we just sort of gloss over things like 48A, 45Q, R&D at the Department of Energy for things like Operation Tundra and all those types of things. We sort of gloss over those like they're easy. Now, the reality is they're not easy. They are important, but they don't even begin to approach the benefit of cash to the wind energy to just keep building more wind turbines and wind farms. And so you're right, Jason, for us to be able to come up with some sort of a equitable trade, if you will, we're going to have to be really creative. And, you know, like the art of the deal, you go for it all and then see where you can negotiate towards. Either that or we just knock everything off, and then I like our chances. But there's so many public policy biases as well. I mean, I don't mind telling you this. Donald Trump has to win re-election. I mean, he just has to. We have to do everything we can to make sure he wins re-election. That people like Dan Bruyere and the rest of the cabinet remain in place, or at least they're replaced by people like them. So Dave Bernhardt's another one at Department of Interior who's just been fantastic. Although I will tell you, he and every one of his assistants and deputies regrets giving me their cell number because I know every permit you guys are waiting on, and so do they, by the way.
So
yeah,
we had
thank
another,
you for that too. Yeah.
so here we had another question. Is there any federal engagement that can help provide clarity related to the future of Coal Creek Station, whether it's resiliency payments or recognition, or what is your perspective related to that?
Well, you know, that's one where I don't want to get too deep into the weeds necessarily, but we're looking at every possibility. I mean, my personal belief of it is that it's just too good a facility to not utilize. And I'm not going to think out loud too much in this one, because I have been in such direct contact with the utility, with the coal, you know, with obviously with North American, and with frankly local officials, and really local officials, and we're all trying to work together to find a solution that you know, that's a winner, without making too many presumptions. I mean, that's the other problem, is you can go one way or another based on the presumptions. And of course, some of our challenge has to do with the fact that we have utilities in North Dakota in two different TROs, and so we need to work through some of that as well, you guys. But yeah, I mean, we're looking for whatever we can do to save that really good facility.
So here's a question for you, Senator, regarding just the politics of it. I mean, we could make a list of senators who have significant amounts of coal in their states. What is the political situation or political support for coal in the Senate as compared to some of these other energy initiatives? And what can we do to build that coalition to give you the backstop you need to get some of this stuff done?
Yeah, boy, Jason, you nailed it, because one would think if it was simply a matter of Republican versus Democrat, at least we have a couple more than they have. You know, we had 53 to 47. Of course, it's not. While most Republicans in the Senate, probably all of the Republicans in the Senate, you know, have a pretty good sense and good feeling about the role of coal in our mix, and probably support it. There are some who at least equally support renewables. And so when you're in that position, when you're negotiating with yourself, you have, you know, you don't have a lot of leverage. On the Democratic side, there's like one Democrat that supports coal, and maybe there's 1.5. But even there are some that at least understand the value. And now I have to say, with regard to certain things like carbon capture utilization, storage technologies, things like that, on the EPW, the Environment and Public Works Committee, we do pretty well on a bipartisan basis. But you have to have something that you're willing to give them as well, in order to get Democratic support. So while we might have a mixture of views, not everybody thinks the same, or like their tribe thinks. Everybody understands leverage, and they all understand that, well, I kind of like that, I like this more, so I'm not going to give them that until I get some of this. And I would say in the Senate's like probably a little bit like America itself, and that is that it's gravitating another direction. You know, we're losing some of it. I'm just plugging things in here. I wish it was better. I wish we had a better mix, frankly.
So similarly,
that's why I keep wishing the pandemic would cause all of the coal plants to go down and people could grow to appreciate again how important it is. But
what they have.
So similarly, the question related to kind of R&D funding, are we, either the industry and or the federal government, state government, planning to put more money into future technologies, and in particular as a response to the agenda of the Green New Deal?
Yeah, great question. And I do, yes, the answer is yes. And we want to. And so that you know, and maybe I've told some of you this, but Dan Bruyere and I are really good friends. I mean, before he became secretary, I was helpful, I guess, in getting him the position of deputy. And then I was very helpful in getting him the position as secretary. In fact, the president and I talked, I think, twice the day he nominated him, and Dan and I probably 3 times the day he nominated him. I love him like a brother. He's just a great guy. He and I have done some things together prior to his terms, even at DOE when I was in the House. So he wants to visit with you guys. He has committed to coming out and meeting with you. We had something lined up when he was going to speak at the Lignite Energy, or I'm sorry, at the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference. And what was really interesting, when he was talking to me about it, he said, well, what would you like me to do? And I said, well, it all depends on how much time you spend. But I said, what I want to do is maximize however much time you have really just talking to people. You know, as much as we love putting celebrities on drag lines, I'm kind of to the point where I just want every eyeball to eyeball moment we can have with these guys that have something to offer. Well, then he said, well, listen, I'll stay an extra full day or two if you need me to. And then think, great, we'll put you on a drag line. And we can, because there is something valuable about that too. But he's willing to talk to you and look at and think out loud with you about every possibility, but especially on the research and development side. Because I don't have to tell you, as I've said many times over the years, maybe even a couple of decades, there's a lot of innovation to solve the problems that people think we have with climate, with pollutants and whatnot. But none of that innovation is going to take place if we kill the innovator. And so we need to have both the investment incentives and as well as the federal investment in especially early stage technologies to make sure that we get there. And Dan's very committed to that.
So here's another question, maybe a little bit about strategy or your philosophy about things. How do we separate coal from the word energy? In other words, coal being included as part of an energy discussion eliminates just the word coal. Is there a way, in your view, to separate the coal discussion from the energy discussion so we can focus just on the coal industry as related to every other energy?
I love that you'd ask that question, Luke, because it's one of my frustrations as well. There are lots of ways that to talk in politics, and we should always try to find the right one. But sometimes you're right. Sometimes we do ourselves the most harm. Just as an example, and I don't walk to the Capitol from my office to the floor without talking to a reporter from E&E or Political Pro Energy or Wall Street Journal Energy or Washington Post Energy, Bloomberg, another one. I talk to them a lot, and we always talk about big packages, and the Senate talks about big packages, and we have this tendency to sort of diminish the importance of important things by sometimes talking about big packages. And I do think you're exactly right. Not all energy is created equal. And when we do that, anybody that likes to do that is operating from the weaker position, in my view. That's what it's more important that they get associated with energy than energy be associated with coal, maybe be a way to put it. So I'm completely with you. I don't know necessarily what the solution to it is, but in my mind's eye, I never confuse wind and solar with coal and nuclear. I never confuse, an electric vehicle with a gas-fired engine, even if it's plugged into a coal-fired, outlet. So I'm clear about that. And but it all sort of depends too on who you're talking to, obviously, and their sophistication of understanding things. But yeah, I take your question as an opinion as well. It's a good one.
So there's another question here. We touched on this a little bit, but just, I mean, you've got colleagues, as you had mentioned, that are from coal states, and at the end of the day, if let's take away phase 4, what are your thoughts on working with folks to ensure that the PTC is not extended for another year? I mean, even people have said that they're okay with the extension running out, but it seems to always come up at the end of the year.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think for whatever reason the PTC has a lot of supporters, and I think part of the reason is because you have previously non-energy states that suddenly find themselves in the energy business. Maybe gets a little bit to your previous question, but for the PTC, they're not in the energy business, and so much for so long, energy was the only driver of our economy. In fact, during the Obama years, which were the most tepid economic recovery ever, all of the new wealth created in this country, all of the growth in the economy was in the energy sector. A lot of it was a result of the shale revolution, but some of it were these other areas. And so places like Iowa and Kansas and whatnot that have a lot of wind, suddenly they have energy senators and energy congressmen that previously weren't that committed to it. Probably at least they didn't wake up every day thinking about it. So it does enjoy a lot of the renewables enjoy a lot of political benefit from the fact that they can sort of be created anywhere. If you're from real sunny states, you've got solar. If you're from windy states, you've got wind. So places that didn't have coal or oil suddenly are energy. And when you combine that constituency or that membership with just the environmental extreme membership, you create a majority. So they're a real force to go up against. So you either have to be willing to do one of two things: either be willing to negotiate a lot, in other words, give them a lot for whatever it is you want, but they have to need what you give them. In other words, they have to need your vote for you to have any leverage, or just to play hardball and say, no, this is a line I will not cross. I'm never going to cross it. I, by the way, never say what I'll never do, but you can say I'm never going to cross it, and just put your foot down and hold up everything until such time as they either get 60 votes or they relent. But those are calls that you have to make sort of issue by issue. It's why big omnibus spending bills are so dangerous, because big omnibus spending bills have so many things that everybody wants that they can't be against them in many cases, or you can be against them and hope that they pass anyway. But that's more a luxury of the House than it is of the Senate, given the 60 vote margin and the fact there are only 100 of us. So again, this comes down to one issue at a time. I prefer, as much as I don't like big energy packages, maybe I dislike big omnibus packages much more. At least in an energy package, if you've got renewables and you've got fossils and you have things like efficiencies and conservation programs and whatnot, you can put them all into a mix and you can weigh one against the other. The other thing, I suppose, Luke, would be just a broad-based policy that says there shall be this mix and everybody gets a piece of it. But that's really sort of socialized energy, and I've always liked just and reasonable, as long as you don't apply a whole bunch of externalities to it. But the problem today is that just and reasonable comes with all this other policy baggage attached to it that has nothing to do with just and reasonable. It has to do with social engineering.
So, Senator, we have time for 2 more questions. The first is, have you seen the new surprising Michael Moore documentary, Planet of the Humans? Do you have any comments or about how we can better communicate to Congress the truths about green energy and how it really isn't saving or can't save the planet, but how it may actually be detrimental to our national energy policy, our pocketbooks, or even to our environment?
Well, I've not seen the new Michael Moore documentary, and I'm not sure. Short of everything going black except the one stream that would have that on it, I'm not sure I'm likely to see it. But if it's amusing, I might look it up if you recommend it. I was the star of a Michael Moore documentary about the least visited state in the country when I was tourism director. It was brutal, but it was lighthearted and kind of fun to be part of. I don't mind telling. It's still floating around out there on YouTube if anybody wants to look it up.
Find that.
It's really pretty funny, frankly. With regard to the broader topic, I don't know how you effectively communicate a truth to people who want to believe the lie. And so some of it's going to have to be experienced. And this is what bothers me so much about particularly coal, because as you know, coal is not a highly, flexible, dispatchable energy source. And whether it's mothballing or obviously taking down that, there's no real great recovery from that. And so consequently, the lessons have to start getting, being learned here fairly soon. And I'm not advocating for any type of proactive approach to that, but where they've experienced it in other places. I will tell you, you might have seen a floor speech I gave on early in my term in the Senate. It was a Senate floor speech where I actually had I think it was a Green New Deal speech actually, when the Green New Deal came out, and I actually did have a big chart with wind speeds, and I was talking about the polar vortex and how close we came in a couple of places, a couple of regions of our country to losing our grid. And it was really, I was trying to make it a teachable moment. But fortunately, we've been able to survive, whether it's a polar vortex or a really, really bad hot streak where the grid was just hanging by a thread, whether through luck or good management at the RTO level, where they were able to keep it together enough to at least avoid catastrophe. But I would have thought that those lessons would have been enough to teach at least serious policymakers and serious opinion leaders to reconsider their attack on coal and nuclear. But we have a really short attention span, you guys, in this country. So
last question, then
I think intellectually the argument is there. We just have to get people to listen.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Last question. I'll let Jason wrap it up and we'll end lighthearted. There was a plan floated last night to move Major League Baseball into 3 divisions, Midwest or Central, East, and West Coast, and play in, try to get 111 games in. What are your thoughts on that? What's the likelihood on seeing some baseball by the 4th of July?
I didn't see that plan, but I'm supportive of any plan that gets us playing baseball. That's my favorite sport to watch on TV. It's my favorite sport to go watch in real life, actually. So I'm for any sport that gets it. If it's 111 games, it's better than no games or fewer than 111. It probably has to be something. Although I to be honest, one of the things I was sort of looking forward to in baseball is a whole bunch of doubleheaders. And I know that sort of goes against the grain, and I know the players union probably doesn't like that idea so much. But I remember as a kid, we never went to a Twins game that wasn't a doubleheader. We'd drive down from Fargo or from Kindred down to the Twins. We'd go to doubleheaders, and not that they had bunches of them, but you tried to plan it that way. And it would certainly change coaching. It would certainly change the bullpen strategies and then the starting pitching strategies and things like that. But I don't know. I think major league players playing more of a sandlot baseball cycle would be sort of fun anyway. So I'd be all for something like that. The other thing I like, there's been this talk of the NHL wrapping up their season by playing in more remote locations outside of the NHL states. And of course, they've been looking in North Dakota, and North Dakota is probably the first place you would think of if you're in the NHL, thinking about where would a good state without an NHL team be for us to play some NHL hockey. And that could be pretty fun and exciting as well. But not that I go to a lot of hockey games, but if it brings professional sports to North Dakota, even for
between Shields and the Ralph, you could probably get a lot of hockey games played.
I think so.
Well, Senator, thanks for joining us. If you have any concluding thoughts, you might give us a concluding thought about what happens in the election coming up this year, and then we can conclude. And once again, we'll thank you for your time.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thank you, Jason and Luke, and all of you. The LEC is such a great group and a great organization. And I just appreciate both your support, but more than anything, your accessibility to me. As I always say, it's, you know, in the United States Congress, or like most places, you can be successful by either being smart or resourceful. So I lean heavily on resourcefulness, and you guys are a really important, valuable one to me. With regard to the election, it is really important. Obviously, it's important for lots of reasons. It's important to our national security, to our economics. It's really important for the fossil fuel industry and just basically energy in general. But all of that's important back to the fundamentals, the economy, national security. And so energy security is chief among those things. And that's why we simply have to win this next election. How's it going to shape up? I don't really know. I do know the Donald Trump phenomenon, the wave, if you will, of 2016 was something very few people saw coming. You know, I was a very lonely guy at the North Dakota Republican Convention when I endorsed Donald Trump. I'll never forget it, standing outside holding a news conference outside the arena while Ted Cruz was giving the speech. But even I didn't necessarily see the wave coming. It was just pretty obvious to me that Donald Trump is very well liked among Republicans in North Dakota and throughout the country. But he's been really a remarkable president in many ways. But in order for us to finish the work that he's begun, we really do need to have 4 more years, because there's no question that they are out to undo everything that he's done, and certainly make sure that he can't do any more. How it's going to turn out, Jason, is really a tough call because of what we're going through right now. I would say he drew a really good opponent. I almost can't believe it until you look at the rest of the lineup that tried to get the job, and you see that Joe Biden somehow came out the winner of that group, and you just sort of shake your head. But again, people are going to vote, in my view, based on to some degree on how we come through this pandemic and how he restarts the economy. I think he's handled the pandemic quite well. But I do think that the comparison, the contrast between Joe Biden and Donald Trump is so rich, and it can best be illustrated by the 2 men standing side by side through about 2 or 3 debates for people to see the intellectual and the energy levels of these 2 men and the difference between them. It makes such a clear-cut case. The other thing, of course, thank God for the Electoral College. I mean, the thing that we're doing right now, the idea, the exceptional idea that the founders had of creating a United States Senate where every state had equal power in the Senate, has saved the republic, really. And the Electoral College, of course, is an extension of that into presidential politics. And so our little rectangle in the middle of the continent has something to say about the Senate, and something to say about the presidency with their 3 electoral votes. And I'm confident of how we're going to deliver. But those swing states of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, and Iowa, even to a degree, maybe Minnesota's even in play this go around. I think it is, and I hope it is. Those are all going to be really, really close states, I suspect, and we need to win as many of them as we can by whatever the margin is. And that's why it's always such a thin thread. As far as the Senate goes, Republicans are defending a lot of seats. We're defending now 23 incumbent seats. I think the Democrats have something like 10. They have one that's really vulnerable in Doug Jones in Alabama. We have several that are quite vulnerable. So we need a Trump victory and a bit of a Trump wave to ensure that we hang on to the Senate. Maybe we could even grow the Senate a little bit if we have that kind of wave that we had in 2016, and that would surprise everybody. If we get the House back, great. But one of the great hallmarks of the Republican Senate and working with Donald Trump is the fact that we are now around 200 federal judges that have been nominated by President Trump and confirmed by this Republican Senate. And of course, we had to change the rules to get that done. Went from a 60 vote margin to a 50 plus margin for confirmations. So 2 Supreme Court justices, something like 50 appellate judges, and a whole bunch of district federal judges. And those things are big things. Those are going to make a big difference, as you know, and even in your business, probably especially in your business, where lawsuits and friendly lawsuits result in policy. The judiciary matters a great deal. I mean, look at the Affordable Clean Energy Act. Look at Waters of the U.S. These big federal policies, even regulations, rules and regulations that end up going up the chain of the judiciary, calls for a Donald Trump re-election. So I'm pretty optimistic, but it's not a layup.
Sounds good. Once again, Senator, thanks for joining us. Thanks to everybody on the call. Thanks. The first time we've ever done something like this, it went well. Thank you, Senator, for your flexibility in doing this. Thanks to everybody at companies who made time available for your employees to join us, and we'll reconvene and do this again in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Look forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks. One final plug, Friday night, 7:00 p.m., coalmovie.com, our year-long documentary that we've been working on, is premiering. So hope everybody can tune in. coalmovie.com, Friday night. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.